Morning, it's Evan. So we're starting a new topic today. We're going to look at data, and specifically we're looking at scatter graphs. We'll be looking in other lessons at correlation and lines of best fit. But for now, we're just looking at what is a scatter graph. We're going to plot some, and you are going to trying to read from them. What I want you to do to make sure that you're ready for this lesson is have a piece of paper, a ruler, and a pencil and rubber ready. Ideally, you'd have squared paper, and even better, you'd have graph paper to help you. It makes you much more accurate the smaller your squares are. During this, I'm going to be asking you to draw some graphs. I'm not going to ask you to submit them at the end, but if you email me with pictures of what you've done, I'm going to be giving stags for effort because I think there's quite a few here, and I know that drawing a graph does take a little bit of time. So nobody's going to be told off for not having submitted it, but if you do email me with pictures of the work that you've done from this video, I will give you a stag. So let's look at it first. So this is a scatter graph. You can see that there are points on here that are crosses. They look a little bit like coordinates. And we have on our axes the height, so that's obviously the height of a person, and their hand length. And obviously there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces of data here, so 10 different people. And they're comparing to see whether if you're taller, you have a larger hand length. And you can see that there is almost a line going on here. We could potentially draw a sort of, if we were to use a ruler, a sort of line here, and that's called a line of best fit. We'll talk more about those later. But there is a link here between people's height and their hand length. Okay, so this scatter graphs are trying to find a link between the two pieces of data shown. Now this one is one where we're comparing the hours of TV that people watch and their weight, and we're looking again at another 10 people. And you can see that if we were trying to draw a line here, it would be very difficult. You couldn't draw a line going like this. You couldn't draw a line going like this. It wouldn't link many of the plot points up. So we would say that for this particular scatter graph, there is no correlation. And we can say that for 10 people here, there's no link between their weight and how much TV they watched. So sometimes scatter graphs will find a link, a correlation, sometimes they will not. Okay, so what I want to do now is to look at two pieces of data. One is their 8 people's scores in a maths test and a science test. And we're trying to find, is there a correlation between the scores that they get in their maths test and the scores that they got in their science test? i.e., if we were going to make a hypothesis, a kind of prediction about what it might be, you might think, well, if people are good at maths, they're probably good at science. Or if people struggle at maths, they might also struggle with science. Or you might think something different. You might think for your hypothesis that people with low scores in maths might get better scores in science. So just for a second, think about your hypothesis. What do you think the link will be? And then what I want you to do is to draw that graph. So here we have the axes, and this is the first one where I said if you submit it to me via email, you might be able to get some extra marks. Can you please draw that, pause the video, draw that graph, and see what you can find. If you're really, really struggling for what that should look like, don't worry, in a second I'll show you the completed graph. Okay, so that first one, linking maths and science scores, for the 8 people, it looks like this. And what we can say from that is that there is clearly a link. If it forms a straight line, we can say there's a correlation, or approximately a straight line. And we can see from here, roughly, if we were to put a line through as many points as we possibly can, it'd be probably something along these lines here. We can see that there is a link between people's scores in maths and their scores in science. And we can say that those who score highly in maths also seem to score highly in science, and those who didn't score so well in maths also didn't score so well in science. So I wonder if your hypothesis was correct. Hopefully it was. Okay, so now let's have a look at 2 more pieces of data. And for these pieces of data, you're going to draw 2 separate graphs. So the first one is sales of scarves and the temperature on those days. So you can see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday along the top. How many scarves were sold on those days and what the temperature was. And then underneath it, for the second chart, the second scatter graph, you're going to draw, it's about 8 different journeys by car, the distance that was traveled, and how much petrol in litres was used in those journeys. I want you to also plot that onto a scatter graph. Again, if you email me the pictures of this, then I will give stags for those that do. I'm going to say pause the video now, draw those two, and then we'll look at them in just a second. Okay, so the scarves should look like this. So you can see that generally, the higher the temperature, the fewer the scarves. When it was 20 degrees, they still somehow managed to sell quite a lot of scarves. They managed to sell 7 scarves. But when the temperature dropped, they sold way more. They sold 82 scarves. Now, we could say that there's definitely a link here. There's definitely sort of a line which would best fit all of them. But you can see, I don't know if my lines get, there we go, nice and straight. So this is a line that will go through most of them. But you can see that there are 2 points here, which are what we might call outliers, points that are not really on that line. And that's this rather odd one here, where even though the temperature went up, they sold more scarves, which is interesting. So that one, the data on that odd point there was on a Saturday. So, but we don't know all the background. So maybe that shop just didn't open till lunchtime because someone had to sleep in. Or maybe it was a day where there was a carnival and they couldn't get into the shop or something. But that's an odd one. And then this one here, right at the very, very top, just showing that it doesn't really fit on the line. But then I suppose you would expect at a certain temperature, very few people are going to start buying scarves. So we're now beginning to look at not only is there correlation, but are there slightly odd points, outliers that are not quite on the line of on that line which best fits all of them. Okay, and then this is the one for the petrol. And as you can see, again, we have quite a nice correlation. It kind of goes up in a nice straight line going from the bottom here. And you can see that most of them fit along that line. There is one that sticks out at the top there. And for that one, it seems a little bit odd. They've traveled further, but suddenly they've used a lot more petrol. And I was kind of trying to think about what would be a best explanation for this as a prediction. Obviously, it's not based on fact or knowledge, but I wonder whether actually it's something like someone has driven all the way from London down to Lymington and has suddenly hit all those country roads where there's winds and bends, and the roads use a lot more petrol because they're more windy and there's lots more braking. And maybe that's just it. That's just someone's driven from London. But you can see that if we look at the 2 different graphs that we've just drawn, this one has a pattern, a correlation that kind of goes up like this. And this one has a pattern or correlation that goes downwards. And we will talk about those more later, but we can see that there's 2 different types of correlation here, one that goes down and one that goes up. Right, so now what I want you to do, your task is set for you, and I want you to just have a go at completing the scatter graphs and trying to find if there's anything else you discover. Off you go.